Cops called to investigate smell from abandoned house. Didn't expect to find this. If you thought you had bad neighbors, think again. A late night party is nothing compared to what neighbors in a small Madagascar village had to put up with. It started with a strange smell coming from what everyone thought was a vacant house. They all tried their best to ignore the smell, but they knew something was wrong. At first, the residents in the neighborhood couldn't put a finger on where the smell was coming from. The smell was so strong that it felt like it was suffocating the entire area. Nobody wanted to point fingers either, so the issue just kept getting worse and worse. Finally, the neighborhood came together and discovered the smell was coming from a seemingly abandoned house. Now they decided they could do something about it. The neighbors now had to figure out how to get in and solve the problem since the house was abandoned. They could enter illegally, but the smell was so rancid that they wanted to make sure there was no trouble inside. Although everyone assumed that the house had been abandoned, surprisingly, people were seen coming and going from the house. People couldn't believe anyone would even go near the foul-smelling house, let alone go inside it. What was in the house that anyone would even dare go near it? Incredibly, the smell actually went away for a while, and the neighbors went about their regular business. Just when everyone thought that their worries were over, the smell came back in full force. The neighbors even had a meeting to discuss the issue amongst themselves. At this point, everyone came to the conclusion that the smell was coming from the suspected house. However, they knew that they couldn't intrude by themselves, so they decided it was time to call the police. They told the officers that the smell was beginning to concern them, and the officers had an idea what it might be. After receiving the call, the police did their duty and decided to investigate the house. They brought along some of the neighbors to help guide them around the property. Little did they know what they'd be greeted with. The police didn't know what they were up against, so they made the necessary preparations. In case anything went awry, they brought in a team of specialists, including a medical examiner and a wildlife expert, among others. Sora Randrianjefizanaka was one of the members of the wildlife community. Her department was one of the expert committees called upon by the police to help investigate the house. The exact location of the house was located in the city of Toliara, a place on the southwest coast of Madagascar. The town's regarded as being incredibly beautiful as well as peaceful, where the residents coexist without any real troubles. Because of the city's reputation, the police had a hard time believing that the situation was a result of foul play. So they called on Randrianjefizanaka just in case the smell might be animal-related. Upon arriving at the home, they realized that the pungent smell was something they couldn't put their finger on. Randrianjefizanaka was beside herself as to what it could be, so she prepared herself to enter. When the police and experts entered the house, the smell was so strong that many of them even became lightheaded. They were completely engulfed in the scent and had no choice but to keep moving deeper into the house. As they made their way through the house, everyone stopped in their tracks when they heard a noise. Although the sound was not very loud, it was loud enough that everyone heard it. Everyone was on their guard now, almost sure that they weren't alone. As it turns out, there were other people on the property. Both parties were in complete shock. This only made the police and experts more confused than they originally were. When the team came face to face with the other people, they had shovels in their hands. Not only that, but they were digging holes as well. When the police approached and asked what they were doing, unsurprisingly, they began acting strange. Now everyone knew that something was definitely off about the whole situation. The diggers looked like they were trying to hide something, a look the cops could see right through. As soon as the police moved closer, they dropped their shovels as if they'd been caught. As if they knew they were in trouble, the diggers immediately put their hands up in the air. There was no point in running, so their only option was cooperating. The police then assumed that they did something bad and followed protocol. After they'd arrested the suspects, the police were able to go back inside and see what the people had been hiding. So the authorities headed back into the trashed interior of the house and braved the smell once again. Upon entering the rooms, it was clear that the interior of the house had been completely destroyed. Everything was falling apart. There was no light, and the ceilings and windows were covered in cobwebs. They were still looking around to find the source of the foul stench when they discovered something unbelievable. The floor was moving in certain areas of the house. At first, they were startled until they finally realized what they were looking at. Almost the entire floor was covered in tortoises that were packed in like sardines. There were so many that it looked like they made up the entire floor. The team was speechless as they stood in disbelief. However, Rondri and Jeff Izanaka realized that these were no ordinary tortoises and had no clue where they'd all come from. It was hard to look through the rest of the house because there were so many of them scattered everywhere. Rondri and Jeff Izanaka immediately knew what she needed to do. She needed to get these tortoises out of the house as soon as possible and relocate them to a safe and suitable place. These animals had been horrendously treated, and it was more than likely that many of them were on the brink of death. It was going to be a lot of work and take a lot of time, but every second the tortoises remained in the house, they were in danger. Rondri and Jeff Izanaka knew there was something special about the tortoises, and she was right. The tortoises are rare and known as radiated tortoises. They're rarely spotted in the wild, and only a limited number of the species call Madagascar home. They're known for their docile nature as well as the unique markings on their shells. It started to make sense to Rondri and Jeff Izanaka and the rest of the team why the people they arrested had all these animals. Because of their rarity, these creatures are often poached by criminals. Some people even eat them as a delicacy. On the less extreme side of things, people own them as pets. However, keeping these rare tortoises is against the law, but clearly that's not stopping anybody. There are a lot of underground operations that involve stealing the tortoises and illegally selling them. At this point, the species is almost extinct because of how they're treated. This instance was especially heinous. At one point, this species of tortoise were thriving. However, in recent years, their numbers have dropped drastically. In the 1990s, it was estimated that their population was around 12 million, still a relatively low number. However, by 2010, their numbers had dropped to below 6 million. Now there are only an estimated 3 million. Although the team knew that there were countless tortoises in the house, they couldn't tell how many. In total, there were over 9,000 of them crammed in that small space. Although the tortoises had been living in appalling conditions and had been horribly mistreated, they were happy they were able to recover so many. Because many of them were sickly, a lot of care was taken in transporting them to a safe place. Because they'd found so many, the team was hopeful that they might be able to help bring their population numbers back up. Unfortunately, not everything was as good as it seemed with the animals. Even though those helping with the tortoises were happy that they found them, they also learned the hard truth. Unfortunately, it was discovered that many of the tortoises wouldn't survive to the next week because many of them were severely ill. Most of them were dehydrated, and although the vets did all they could do, they couldn't save them all. Even working around the clock, it was almost impossible to work with over 9,000 tortoises. Although many people have been caught, arrested, and charged for animal cruelty, it still continues to happen every day. People become so controlled by greed and money that they forget animals are living beings just like us and deserve to be treated with respect. All in all, around 8,000 of the tortoises survived the near-death experience. Now the question is what to do with them. The team wasn't sure if they were ready to be released back into the wild, but they were also sure that no facility could look after all 8,000 of them. After all, they'd been through the worst. So now everyone just wanted them to be comfortable and be happy. It was the least they could do for them. As it turns out, the tortoises couldn't be released back into the wild. This is so because they've spent so much time of their lives in that house. So simply releasing them back into the wild would put them at risk of dying or being captured by poachers again. Instead, they'll be looked after closely by teams of experts who will ensure that they're safe and comfortable. Now, the tortoises can finally relax. Today, the tortoises have never had a better life. They get plenty of attention, food, water, and have a dedicated team that's beyond excited to work with them. At the moment, the first thing that the researchers are focusing on is how to get their population numbers back up. They have 8,000 tortoises to work with, so things are beginning to look up, not just for this group of tortoises, but for the species overall. Not only are the people who illegally hoarded these poor turtles criminals, but they're animal abusers as well. Considering the extent of their crime, many people wanted to see them receive the justice they thought the criminals deserved. In court, they were judged harshly and received long prison sentences for their crimes. This also helped send a message to anyone else who might be involved in such activities. Now the criminals will know what it's like to be held against their will in a small space.